Hello, mamas, and welcome back to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast. Today, we are kicking off with episode 3 in the Pregnancy Nutrition series, diving into pregnancy cravings, of which I have had many, as well as healthy gestational weight gain. Now, this is episode 3 of our 5-part pregnancy nutrition series with the wonderful Larissa Telfer, who is an accredited practicing dietitian and diabetes educator. Don't forget, we have already released the first 2 episodes in this series, covering the specific nutrients needed for each individual trimester of pregnancy, as well as what foods to avoid during pregnancy. So make sure you go and have a listen to that before you dive into today's episode. Now, let's get into episode 3 of our 5-part pregnancy nutrition series. You are going to love today's chat with Larissa as we discuss pregnancy cravings and healthy gestational weight gain. Enjoy! First of all, why do women get cravings? And second of all, is it something that women should give into? Is it a sign your body is telling you need these things? Or should we, for the most part, try and rein those cravings in? And, for example, I craved a lot of hash browns in my first pregnancy, a lot of cheese and Vegemite toasties in my second pregnancy. So what's your advice on cravings? And a little bit of a background maybe on why we get them in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great question, a really, really common one that I get asked. And I often ask women now as part of an assessment when I'm seeing them, what are they getting cravings? What are they getting cravings for? So we can sort of come up with a bit of a plan as well. So the exact reason why we get cravings in pregnancy is actually unclear. So there's a few thoughts or theories around why we do get cravings in pregnancy, one being the hormones in pregnancy, sort of triggering that cravings, certain nutritional deficiencies, and also just cultural and lifestyle factors. So it seems like different cultures potentially do get different cravings for different things as well. And I find that cravings are highly individual as well. And as you mentioned, like a lot of women will crave one thing one pregnancy and the next pregnancy it's something completely different. And interestingly, there is a little bit of research to show that they peak in the second trimester and then can decline towards the end of pregnancy. And I do find this sometimes in practice that particularly in that first and second trimester, if you're getting quite unwell or fatigued or the cravings, I guess, are more pronounced or they're more like, really, really hard cravings for certain things and they can sort of decline towards the end of pregnancy. So, which is good to know.
So fascinating. So for me, as soon as I conceive, I start craving carbs and I don't eat a lot of carbs in my regular diet. So that's why I find it so fascinating. And then as soon as the placenta is out and I'm allowed to have my first meal, all I feel like is salad and vegetables and really light food. Whereas during pregnancy, all I can, think about is heavy bread, croissants, things like that. And what I found so fascinating about cravings as well, and a lot of members inside the Pregnancy Posse talk about their cravings and how specific they are. So I would finish a shift at work. And I remember saying to my colleague, I need to go to the supermarket to get one of those pink ice donuts with the sprinkles, which I probably haven't had in 6 years, but I specifically, no other donut would suffice. It had to be the pink one with the sprinkles. And I found it so fascinating how specific women's cravings are. And I know I'm not the only one there. I'm sure you find this in your clients as well.
Oh, it's fascinating. And some of the things that people crave are very obscure. I mean, obviously the common ones often like pickles, but like pickles and ice cream or, it really is odd what people crave. And it's so highly individual. So as I said, that's why I always ask about it because it's something there's certainly no kind of common threads. And I think in terms of whether to kind of give in to the cravings or avoid them, it really depends on, what you're actually craving. So, and how often you're craving it. So for example, you're craving for a donut or with pink icing. You're better off to just go and eat that pink icing donut that you're really craving, because if you try and avoid it and eat other things, half the time you actually end up eating 6 times or a lot more calories or a lot more food from trying to find something to actually kind of feel that craving than if you just go and eat what you're craving to begin with. Particularly if it's just something that you crave here or there and it's not something that you're wanting every day.
Yes.
I also find a lot of women actually crave fruit in pregnancy, but like quite specific fruit, you know. So some people be craving watermelon or strawberries. And if you're craving watermelon or strawberries, great. Go, you know, that if it's something like that you know is quite healthy and it's not going to cause too much harm, then yeah, go right ahead. And that's something that you can have, which is great. Yeah.
And so I'm thinking with your clients, let's say you are craving hash browns every single day. That's when you might sit down with them and try and come up with an alternative that's maybe better for your body, but might still scratch that itch of wanting that sort of deep fried carby fix.
Carb and salt, which fix.
Yes.
It's pretty common. You know, you're wanting that starch kind of plain carb, particularly if you're feeling unwell as well. In those sort of instances where you're craving that salty sort of carb hit, we might come up with some options. So things like salted popcorn can work well because it's got that kind of crunchy salt texture, and you can have the little packets in your bag so you've got them on hand whenever you need. Salted nuts can work as well for that salty craving. Or like you mentioned, I find a really common one that works is like cheese and Vegemite on toast or on crackers or something as well for a snack, or even avocado and Vegemite on toast works quite well too. And those are things that people can be eating more regularly. So they can work quite well. Yeah,
they're actually really good. Now that you've said that, I actually think most of them probably would have hit the spot if I had given them the opportunity. But I guess when you're in the thick of a craving, it's hard to think of alternatives. So it's good that you've just listed off, you know, those 4 or 5 salty options for women who are craving that saltiness. And I know a lot of women, we will talk about this a little bit later about nausea and morning sickness, but I know a lot of women crave salt to curb their nausea and crackers and things like that. So we'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to speak about 2 things now. Healthy gestational weight gain, because I know that's a little passion area of yours. And I know that these days it's very inconsistent whether weight is measured. So I know personally my weight was never tracked in either of my pregnancies, but I know some women who are weighed every time they go in. So can you give us just like the down low, I guess, on healthy gestational weight gain?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I agree with what you're saying that it's really inconsistent. So some women are weighed every visit. Some people it's not discussed at all. So it's really quite variable in how, I guess, weight is discussed with women in pregnancy. And I think part of the reason this is that it's a sensitive topic. So I know when I've spoken to some doctors that they find it quite uncomfortable having a discussion with weight with women in pregnancy because it is sensitive. And I think that it is a tricky thing to bring up in conversation as well for doctors in it's not something they discuss all the time. However, saying that, I have also experienced lots of women who are further along down the pregnancy and they say to me, I really wish someone had discussed healthy weight gain with me earlier on so I was more aware of it because it just wasn't something they thought about. And they really wish they had have actually had that information from the start of pregnancy so they're really empowered about, you know, how much weight they should be gaining during pregnancy. The actual, I guess, healthy weight gain in pregnancy, it's really highly individual. It comes down to your weight and your BMI prior to pregnancy. For example, women who start pregnancy with a higher body weight may not need to gain as much weight as someone who starts off the pregnancy who might be underweight and need to gain more weight in pregnancy. And there is some guidelines around how much weight specifically to gain depending on what your BMI is at the start of the pregnancy. In terms of, you know, I guess a bit of an average ballpark so people have a bit of an idea. If you're, I guess, a healthy weight or a healthy BMI at the start of your pregnancy, you're looking at a range of sort of 11.5 to 16 kilos being a sort of healthy weight range. The overall kind of average weight gain for pregnancy is around 13 kilos.
Well, that's probably really good because like you said, if you've never heard about weight before, you have no concept of, is it 5? Is it 25? Where's the norm? But 13 kilos is about average. That's good to know.
Yeah. So I think that's a really handy practical number. And again, it's something if you want to get that goal, it's, you know, specific for yourself. Speaking with your doctor, asking them about it, or a dietitian as well can actually provide that guidance for you on how much a kind of healthy weight gain is. And also rate of weight gain as well, like, you know, how much weight you should be gaining a month, you know, for example, as well.
That was going to be my next question because I know a few Pregnancy Posse members have brought this up, but is there is it linear? Is there a progression that you should see a gradual weight gain throughout pregnancy, or will some women, is it completely normal to gain a lot in the first trimester and then very little after that?
Look, there is guidance around kind of healthy weight gain per month in the second and third trimester. So, for example, for someone who's a normal weight at the start of their pregnancy, they're looking at sort of 1.5 to 2.2, 2.3 kilos a month, for example. However, I always want to stress that it's not always, with weight gain in pregnancy, it's not going to be a specific thing where you put on 0.5 kilo each week.
Correct.
Because you have periods where you grow quite quickly, or particularly because of the fluid changes or fluid retention at certain weeks. It's never going to be a perfect linear trajectory. So I think that's really important to stress and really important to keep in mind that, yes, there's some guidance around averages and what that looks like, but it's always going to look different from week to week. Yeah.
And do you have, because I know a lot of women may take this and freak out about it, do you have any wisdom, I guess, or advice around those women who are jumping on the scales every week and worrying about their weight gain? Is it okay if it fluctuates up and down, provided that you are having a healthy diet and exercising regularly? Is that at the end of the day the crux of it? Is that as long as you're doing whatever's in your control? Obviously, we know some women will put on 30 kilos because of other factors like fluid and big babies and whatnot. So do you have I just know some women may take that and get a little bit nervous by it.
Absolutely. No, that is a very, very good point. So yes, there is some women who, I see they're in their third trimester and they've already put on over 20 kilos. So they've put on 25 kilos and they're really disheartened. But then when we actually, weight is only one marker of health. So it's one marker that we look at, but certainly when I sit down with women and we're working through, a bit of an assessment, so to speak, I'm always looking at what are they eating, what's their activity levels like, are they getting all their nutrients? And as I mentioned, weight is definitely only one marker of health. It's not an indication of someone's lifestyle or what they've eaten. And yes, some women are prone to putting on more fluid, particularly in the third trimester, which might mean that they're carrying more weight, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more, fat or body weight as such.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It is one factor in the entire picture of health. So, yeah, that's a really good summary. And I know this is probably a hard one to answer because it's probably quite specific to the individual, but I have also been asked some questions around the safety of dieting or calorie restricting or actually trying to lose weight in pregnancy if you did start off overweight. So what's your advice on that?
This is another thing that, I get asked as well from time to time in practice. And I think it comes down to what your perception of diet or calorie restriction is. So everyone's perception or what they'd consider as calorie restriction or dieting is quite individual as well. So I'd always like to explore what that actually means. So is it restricting to less than 1,000 calories a day? Or, is it about making sure you're getting all your fruits and vegetable serves and that's how you perceive, a diet, if that makes sense. In terms of, a woman's nutritional requirements in pregnancy, it is still very highly individual. So it does come down to someone's activity levels. Some women have really active jobs when they're pregnant, so they're on their feet all day and they're actually needing more energy to fuel that, and underlying medical conditions as well. Generally, we don't suggest strict diets or calorie restriction in pregnancy, particularly diets that might require long periods without eating or fasting, because I find that really can trigger that nausea and vomiting and feeling horrible in pregnancy as well. Or diets that eliminate whole food groups. For example, some diets suggest that you need to eliminate all grains, but we know grains are a really important source of that folate that we've spoken about, B vitamins, and a lot of our grain foods are actually where we get iron as well. And we've seen that women that have lower intakes of carbohydrates in pregnancy, for example, also then have a lower intake of some of those minerals that are really key for pregnancy as well. So if it's something that you're struggling with in terms of you normally are quite a strict eater or you're normally someone that is dieting a lot, it's really worthwhile checking in with a dietitian in pregnancy to work through some of those habits that you have and ways of eating and make sure that they are healthy for pregnancy. or do we need to try and modify some of those habits so that they are safe in pregnancy?
Yeah, really sensible. So I think the key there is definitely check in with someone, because it's not a one size fits all approach. It may be appropriate for you, it may not, but best to speak to somebody about that. Now, we know that a lot of women feel awfully nauseous and have a lot of morning/all-day sickness in that first trimester.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on foods that may be a little bit easier to digest or to help curb their nausea in that first trimester? Because I know this was a really, really hot topic that women wanted me to ask you about is how do I keep down food? What are your tips around that?
Yes, yeah. So I've got a few tricks and tips, I guess, to help with that nausea in the first trimester. But I just want to preface by saying it's so individual. So what works for some women does not work for others.
Correct.
So I think, try these things. They may or they may not work. But if you get to a point where they really, you're vomiting frequently, you're dehydrated, you're not keeping any food down, definitely speak to your doctor, because there is safe medications that you can take to help with that as well. But I guess some things that do help. Firstly, having something small to eat before you get out of bed in the morning. It's very specific, but I also find it's quite effective. It seems to be like that empty stomach that can trigger that nausea and vomiting. And that's why I think it gets the name as morning sickness. So getting up and getting, on with your day on an empty stomach can really trigger that nausea and vomiting, particularly in that first trimester. So, a few dry crackers or something next to the bed have a couple of crackers before you get out of bed in the morning, can actually really help to curb that nausea from the start of the day and sort of break that cycle for the rest of the day. A couple of other things, eating regularly. So again, going long periods without eating and getting that really empty stomach can trigger that nausea and vomiting as well. So regular snacks between meals, small frequent meals throughout the day if you're feeling really awful. The thought of sitting down to a big hot meal at night is just not, a lot of women just can't even bear the thought of it. But, sort of, I guess a more grazing style of eating might work more effectively. It's still getting in some good foods, but not, avoiding that feeling of nausea and vomiting.
Yes, I know so many women who just, I don't know if you're the same with lip balm, but how you have lip balm in the car and the bedside table. That's how I am with lip balm. And I know women become like that with crackers. There's crackers in their handbag, in the car, at their work desk, at home.
Because certainly people will say to me if they need to eat, and if they don't, then they end up just feeling horrible. And once they get in that cycle of feeling horrible, it just goes on for the rest of the day. So,
and it can come on quite quickly, that hunger/nauseous feeling. And if you need to then walk to a cafe to get food and then come back, it can be too long in between. So that's why I like things like crackers, the salted popcorn and those types of things, some salted nuts, and those types of foods can work really well because they can last in your handbag for long periods of time, shoved down the bottom or in the car. You can have them on hand in your desk drawer, and they work really well. A few other things. So ginger can help for some people. I guess there's a few different ways you can have ginger. It could be ginger tea. Some people find like the ginger lollies or ginger ale can actually help to settle nausea. And you can actually get ginger tablets from the pharmacy as well. That can help for some people. It depends on, they're not overly palatable, but they do work for some people. So it can be worth a try. I think when you're feeling horrible in that first trimester, most women will try anything. And then trying to keep it plain as well. So often, I think you mentioned like yourself, you're craving those kind of hot carbohydrate, sort of starchy, plain food. So things like toast and crackers, fruits can be really good as well. Some people find natural yogurt works well because it's quite bland and refreshing. Popcorn, those types of really just plain carb foods can be a bit, I guess, better tolerated in the stomach. So avoiding them. a lot of women, even plain from a taste point of view, but the smell of really rich foods can set nausea off. So having my advice to women, I remember when I opened the fridge in the morning after having tacos the night before, and I pretty much dry reached just at the smell of the tacos, you know, in the fridge, which normally wouldn't set me off. But I think I then after that just decided only plain cooked meals in the fridge. So there's no funny smells or like really rich smells, because even just that can set your nausea or your gag reflex off as well.
Absolutely. And I think we touched on it when we were talking about iron as well, but that's that hypersensitivity of smells that can really set you off. So trying to have cold foods and cold meals can work quite well. So, you know, even things like fritters or frittatas and things that, and they're relatively plain, but they can be eaten cold. People find they really tolerate those types of meals and foods much better than their typical hot, you know, meat and veg meal.
Yeah, that's good advice, actually. Have you, not food related, but if you found a lot of clients, because I have, find brushing their teeth to be really gag reflex, nausea, vomiting inducing?
Yes, I have heard that quite a bit actually. Yeah, which is tricky because you still need to be brushing your teeth. But yeah, it's just funny the things that you become quite sensitive to. And I guess there's quite a smell associated too with the toothpaste and things as well, which probably doesn't help. But yeah.
I know my sister-in-law could only tolerate apples. Unfortunately, she was sick her entire pregnancy. And her babies are much older now, and she still to this day cannot eat apples because of the memory associated with how awful she felt. So it's really fascinating, isn't it? These associations that we have. Oh, I love it. Do you have any other tips for managing nausea or morning sickness in the first trimester?
I think the only other thing is making sure you're keeping your fluids up, particularly if you're vomiting. So if you're getting dehydrated, that's actually then going to make things worse as well. You're going to crave salt more. It's going to keep things, I guess, rolling along that vicious cycle of nausea and vomiting. I don't know about you, but I find a lot of women struggle having plain water if they're feeling quite nauseous. Flavouring water with like slices of lemon and citrus, or even diluting some juice into water, can really help to keep the fluids up, because that's the really important thing if you're vomiting really regularly, to make sure you're really keeping hydrated, because we need to avoid becoming really badly dehydrated. Otherwise, you may need to go into hospital or see a doctor for that. Yeah,
definitely. And would you recommend, again, like small sips regularly throughout the day as opposed to trying to get a whole glass of water down in one go?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sipping. And some people find they tolerate soda water, and fizzy water's better. And that's okay. If you're at that point where you just really need to keep yourself hydrated, that's okay.
Great advice. And we know that fluid consumption is super important for your bowels as well. So unfortunately, when you fall pregnant, you are up against it a little bit, because progesterone slows our digestive system down. Combine that with maybe some iron supplements and a few other factors, and a lot of women end up constipated. So I know I talk a lot to women about mooing on the toilet and using their footstool. If you haven't heard me talk about this, come and have a chat with me, because I'm very passionate about making sure we're not constipated and straining our pelvic floor during pregnancy, because this can really increase a woman's risk of prolapse. But from a dietetics point of view, what advice do you have? We know fibre is really important. So what advice do you have around helping to manage constipation for women during pregnancy?
Yeah, again, this is quite common. So some of the stats are that up to about 50% of women will experience constipation in pregnancy. And to be honest, in practice, I would say it's even higher than that. It's really common because of those hormonal changes that occur in pregnancy. And I find particularly people that have a history of constipation. So some people have struggled with constipation since they were young. Pregnancy can be really a time where this flares up and becomes really tricky to manage. I guess in terms of managing constipation in pregnancy, like you touched on, really boosting your fibre intake can really help. Trying to include high fibre grains and cereals, like adding bran to your cereals, oats, always choosing whole grain breads and whole grain crackers that are higher in fibre as well, can help to boost that fibre intake. Also, your fruits and veggies are a really important source of fibre as well. So making sure you're having, getting your 5 serves of veggies if you can, and at least 2 serves of fruit each day. There is a few fruits that actually can be quite effective with constipation, those being pear and kiwi fruit, and also dried prunes, which we're often familiar with, can keep things moving as well. And even pear and prune juice are quite effective in keeping the bowels moving as well. So those can be useful to have on hand.
And is it true that eating the skin on kiwi fruit is like an extra boost of fibre?
It is, that's correct. Yeah. So it's not for everyone.
Yeah, definitely not. My hot tip is only yellow. The green's too furry, just the yellow. That's quite easy to digest.
It's a bit more palatable. So if that's something, it's definitely worth a try. Same with your veggies as well. Like things like carrot, you don't actually need to peel. So a lot of the fibre in your veggies is actually in the skin. So like I know personally when I'm cooking, I always leave the skin on carrots. And if you're perhaps doing like roasted, potatoes in the oven or something, the skin can actually stay on there, and it actually helps to increase the fibre content as well, which is good. Yeah,
that's a really easy way. If you're cooking that vegetable anyway, it actually saves you time to not have to peel the skin off, and you're getting more fibre. That's really great advice. And it's obviously quite hard because women feel quite nauseous as well. But like you just gave some really easy examples, I think, of different ways to include fibre in your diet. What if you're trying your best to include that fibre but you're still struggling? Is there what's the next step? Is there supplements? What do you recommend women take after they've tried the diet approach?
So there is some clear fibre supplements that you can get over the counter at the pharmacy as well. And they can be quite handy because they can be added to smoothies and drinks and things like that as well, which is good, particularly because whenever we increase fibre for our bowel health, we need to make sure we're increasing our fluid intake as well.
Correct.
So I think that things that increase the fibre intake but also fluid are kind of a double win. Yeah.
I've actually recommended smoothies a lot to my clients who can tolerate it if they're not too sick or nauseous, because I find that's a really great way to get heaps of fruit and veg in without feeling like, you're eating an entire plate. But also, like you said, for the fluid part of it, it's super important because you can actually go the opposite way, can't you? If you're having a lot of fibre without the fluid, you can make yourself more constipated. Is that true?
That's correct, yes. So whenever you're increasing your fibre intake or trying some of these things to boost your fibre intake, it's really crucial that you're also having enough fluid or increasing your fluid intake. So, I agree. Things like smoothies and even adding things like your LSA powders and things to smoothies are a really great way to kind of boost your fluid intake and your fibre intake as well.
Yes, definitely. Yes. A dietitian friend did recommend things like chia seeds and LSA to a smoothie because, again, they're things that you barely even taste, but they do make the world of difference to your bowels for a lot of women. So that's really good advice. Thank you so much, Larissa. I think that gives us such a good summary of managing these really common things in pregnancy. Hey mamas, Laura here, and I really hope that you loved that episode. I particularly loved the discussion around pregnancy cravings and the easy food swap ideas that Larissa gave to make healthier alternatives. I really could have done with that information in my first pregnancy, where I was just smashing good old McDonald's drive-thru for my hash brown fix. Now, I also liked her discussion around weight gain because I know many women are unsure of what is a normal amount of weight gain because not all birth providers measure this anymore. And whilst I also don't think that it is very important for all women to be concerned about weight, and especially those who might be triggered by weighing themselves, I do think it is great information for those women who are genuinely curious. Now, if you'd like to learn more from Larissa, you can find her on Instagram at prenatal_dietitian. I'd also love to hear from you over on my socials at PhysioLaura and let me know your favorite learning from today's episode. In the next few episodes of this pregnancy nutrition series, we will be chatting with Larissa about gestational diabetes, fuel for labor, postpartum nutrition, and so much more. If you haven't already, just subscribe to the Pregnancy with PhysioLaura podcast so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes in this wonderful podcast series. Now, If you love today's episode and you want to devour the next 2 episodes in this pregnancy nutrition series, you can find this entire series along with all our other podcast series live right now inside the Pregnancy Posse. For most series of the podcast, we also record exclusive bonus content for Pregnancy Posse members. And in the bonus member-only episode for this series, Larissa answers members' questions about breastfeeding nutrition and baby-led weaning. So we chat about the extra nutrients and calories that you'll need when breastfeeding, whether keto diets or fasting are a good option after birth, breastfeeding probiotics, and so much more. Inside the Pregnancy Posse, you'll also find weekly guided pregnancy workouts, an extensive resources library on birth preparation, pelvic floor exercises, and managing pelvic pain, plus a wonderful community forum and weekly Q&A sessions with myself. I would love to help you have a wonderful pregnancy, birth, and postnatal experience. So just visit thepregnancyposse.com to see what the Pregnancy Posse is all about and to trial the program for 7 days. I'll catch you soon for episode 4 in this 5-part pregnancy nutrition series where we'll be discussing everything to do with gestational diabetes. Until then, mamas, sending you wonderful pregnancy vibes and enjoy the incredible journey that is pregnancy.